Hello, hello. Welcome to Cranky Frankie. Tonight's show is the story of Joe. Story of Joseph. This is a really good story. Listened to it one time and I couldn't stop actually. It was pretty cool. So hopefully we'll have a few people come in tonight that want to enjoy the show. I'm going to wait a few minutes. I got to go grab my phone too. So give me a minute, guys. I got to run out to my car. I get my phone stand. All right. All righty. Hopefully, we got a few people coming in today. Hi, Jessica. Good to see you. Welcome, welcome. How are you today? I gotta block this window for some reason. The sun, like at 5 o'clock, comes right into the window. Wait a minute. Do I have a shade on it? No. There's a curtain, but there's no shade. But it'll be. See if I turn the camera. Maybe that'll be a little bit better. No, not really. If I move in, let's see if I turn it that way. I'm trapped. All right, let's see. I'll just have to deal with that anyway. You won't see this. You won't see this while the show starts anyway. So yeah, this is a really good story. Like I said, when I listened to it, I was like, wow. I listened to every word. It was just so interesting. It was it's pretty cool. It's amazing what people will do for the Lord, no matter what happens. They stay true to God. You know, which is pretty cool. People endure. They endure no matter what, which is what we're supposed to do. We uh, we don't know how good we have it until we hear other people's tribulations and stuff. And hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Let me just make sure my channel sounds okay. Yep, everything sounds good. Oh, that's cool. What up, Trash? Good to see you. That's cool. So we got a couple of people in. Trash is cool. Jessica's cool. Very cool. Very cool. Welcome in, guys. Welcome in. I'm going to start in about 2 hours. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, this is a pretty cool story, man. Here comes Maggie. I think she's coming in. I heard her jump off the bed. She should be coming in a minute. You'll see her come in the hallway. There's the hallway. Right. Let's see. Right there where my finger is. You'll see her come in. If she really did jump off the bed, it sounded like she did. Oh well. Yeah, it's just amazing. Yeah, we all do that though. We all take things for granted, and then when I hear a story like this, and I'm like, wow. We are spoiled. We're spoiled, all of us. Yeah, this is definitely cool. Just gonna wait another minute or two, and then I'm gonna get it rolling. Here comes Maggie. See, she just came walking in. She just came walking in. Well, come say hello, girl. Come here, girl. Come here, my little special girl. Oh, there she is. You were chewing on your leg, is what you were doing. That's what you were doing. You were chewing on that leg. Yes, you were. You got that belly full of chicken? Yes, you do. All right. Put her down. And I guess I'm going to start the show. You guys ready? All right, let me change the settings here. Change settings. Share the screen. All right, we are ready to go. I just have to pull up the story. I thought I had it pulled up, but I guess I didn't. I had it pulled up. Should have been pulled up. All right, I'll just have to go to the channel here. Hold on, guys. Bear with me. Here it is. Here we go, guys.
From the bright.
Okay, guys, your car insurance company does not want you to know you can do this.
Big chunk of your
Close your eyes and let the world fall away. Tonight, we journey to a time when the desert winds whispered ancient secrets, when stars hung low over tents of wandering shepherds, and when one young man's dreams stirred a hatred so deep it would reshape the course of nations. This is the story of betrayal so cruel it left him for dead, of slavery so bitter it stripped away everything he had ever known, of false accusations so unjust it buried him in darkness, and of a prison so forgotten even hope seemed to abandon him. Yet from that pit, from those chains, from that dungeon cell, God was weaving a plan so magnificent, so unexpected, that it would save millions from starvation and teach the world a truth that echoes through every generation. That what man intends for evil, God can transform into the greatest good. Betrayed by those he loved most, sold as a slave for 20 pieces of silver, falsely accused and imprisoned, forgotten by everyone except the one who never forgets. And then, in a single morning, elevated to become the second most powerful man in the ancient world. So rest now, let your breathing slow, and as you drift towards sleep, walk with us through the sands of time, back to the land of Canaan, where a father's love and a son's dreams set in motion, a divine plan that would echo through eternity. Let the story begin. Chapter 1. The Favored Son. In the hill country of Canaan, where olive trees bent under the weight of the sun and sheep grazed on slopes touched by evening shadows, there lived a man named Jacob. His life had been long and filled with struggle. He had wrestled with men and with God. He had loved 2 women, but only one had truly held his heart, Rachel, whose eyes were gentle and whose smile could quiet the storms within him. Rachel had waited years to bear children while her sister Leah gave Jacob son after son. The weight of that waiting, the ache of empty arms, had pressed upon her like stones. But then, in the fullness of time, when hope had grown thin as a thread, God remembered Rachel, and she bore a son. They named him Joseph, which means may he add. For Rachel whispered through tears of joy, "The Lord has taken away my reproach, and may he add to me another son." From his first breath, Joseph was different. He was the child of Jacob's old age, born of the woman he had labored 14 years to marry. And because of this, Jacob loved Joseph more than all his other children. It was not a hidden love. It was declared, visible, woven into the very fabric of the boy's life. When Joseph was 17 years old, still young with the softness of boyhood lingering in his features, Jacob did something that would change everything. He made for Joseph a coat, not the rough, simple tunic his brothers wore as they tended sheep under the burning sky, but a coat of many colors. Some say it was woven with threads of crimson and violet, of azure and gold. Others believe it was a long robe with sleeves that reached to his wrists, the kind worn by sons who would not labor in the fields but would one day inherit authority and honor. Whatever its exact form, the meaning was clear to everyone who saw it. This son is favored. This son is set apart. Jacob placed it upon Joseph's shoulders himself, and as the fabric settled around the young man, the brothers watched. Their eyes darkened, their jaws tightened, and in the silence of that moment, jealousy planted its roots deep. Joseph was not like his brothers. While they were hardened by the sun, calloused by labor, sharpened by the wildness of the fields, Joseph often remained near his father's tents. He was thoughtful, sensitive, perhaps even innocent in ways that made him blind to the growing resentment around him. He loved his father, honored him, and did not yet understand that love given too freely to one can breed hatred in the hearts of many. The brothers could not speak a kind word to him. When he approached, they turned away. When he smiled, they looked past him. The coat of many colors became a banner of division, a silent declaration that stung with every glance. But it was not the coat alone that sealed their hatred. It was the dreams. One morning, Joseph came to his brothers as they sat breaking bread in the fields. His face was bright with wonder, the kind of light that comes when a soul has glimpsed something beyond the ordinary world. "Listen," he said, his voice eager and unguarded. "I have dreamed a dream." The brothers paused, their hands stilling over the bread. Something in his tone made them uneasy. Joseph continued, his words tumbling out like water from a jar. "We were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." The air grew cold. One of the brothers, perhaps Simeon, whose temper was always near the surface, spat into the dust. "Will you indeed reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" The words were laced with venom. The others murmured, their voices low and bitter. From that day, they hated him even more. But Joseph, in the innocence, or perhaps the naivety of youth, did not stop. The dreams continued, and he shared them as if they were gifts, not knowing they were daggers to the hearts of his brothers. The second dream came soon after. This time, Joseph went to his father and his brothers together. "Behold, I have dreamed another dream," he said, his eyes still filled with that strange, distant wonder. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Even Jacob, who loved him so dearly, rebuked him for this. "What is this dream that you have dreamed?" he asked, his voice edged with caution. "Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" But though Jacob rebuked him with words, the scripture says he kept the matter in his heart. Something in him recognized that these were not ordinary dreams. These were echoes of something divine, whispers of a future not yet written in the dust, but already inscribed in the plans of heaven. The brothers, however, that every word. He wore a coat of many colors. He dreamed of stars and sheaves. And he believed, with the kind of trust only the innocent possess, that his family loved him. But love, when mixed with envy, can curdle into something poisonous. And jealousy, when left to fester in the human heart, does not remain silent for long. It waits. It watches. It sharpens its blade in the shadows. Joseph walked among his brothers like a lamb among wolves, unaware that the coat on his back had become a target, that his dreams had marked him, and that soon, very soon, the favor he had known all his life would be stripped away in a single brutal act of betrayal. But God, who sees the end from the beginning, was already at work. The dreams were not foolishness. They were prophecy. And though darkness was coming deep, suffocating darkness, it would not have the final word. For the God who gave Joseph dreams was the same God who would fulfill them. No matter how impossible the path, no matter how deep the pit, no matter how long the night, the boy in the coat of many colors was about to lose everything. But he was also about to become exactly who God had always intended him to be. The story was just beginning. Chapter 2. The Pit of Betrayal. The sun rose over Canaan as it always had, indifferent to the hearts of men. Jacob stood at the entrance of his tent, his hand shading his eyes as he gazed toward the northern pastures where his sons had taken the flocks to graze near Shechem. Days had passed, and no word had come. The old man's heart stirred with unease, not fear exactly, but the kind of restlessness that comes when a father is separated too long from his children. He called for Joseph. The young man came quickly, still wearing the coat that marked him as different, as favored. Jacob looked at him with eyes that held both love and worry. "Your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem," Jacob said. "Go now and see if it is well with them and with the flocks, and bring me word." Joseph nodded without hesitation. "I am ready," he said simply. He did not know he was walking toward his own destruction. He did not know that his father's simple request would lead him into a darkness so complete it would swallow 17 years of innocence in a single afternoon. Jacob watched his beloved son disappear over the hill, the coat of many colors bright against the pale morning sky, a splash of beauty in a world that had grown hard. It was the last time Jacob would see that coat unstained. Joseph walked for days. The road from Hebron to Shechem was long, winding through valleys where the heat shimmered above the stones and the only sound was the cry of hawks circling overhead. When he finally reached Shechem, the fields were empty. The flocks were gone. His brothers were nowhere to be found. He wandered through the pastures, calling out, searching, until a stranger approached a man who had seen the brothers pass by. "They have gone from here," the man said, pointing north. "I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" And so Joseph went after them, his feet already weary, his heart still innocent. He did not know that his brothers had seen him from a distance, that they had recognized the coat even before they could see his face, that the sight of it had ignited something savage within them. "Look," one of them said, his voice low and sharp. "Here comes this dreamer." The word was spoken like a curse. Another brother spat into the dust. "Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. We can say, 'A fierce animal devoured him.' Then we will see what becomes of his dreams." The words hung in the air, heavy and dark. For a moment, no one moved. Murder is not a small thing, even among men whose hearts have grown cold. But the hatred had been festering for so long, fed by every glance of favor, every careless word about dreams, every moment Jacob's eyes lingered on Joseph instead of them. It was Reuben, the eldest, who stepped forward. He was no saint. His own sins had cost him his father's blessing, but something in him recoiled at the thought of spilling his brother's blood. "Let us not take his life," Reuben said carefully. "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him." He said this hoping he could return later, pull Joseph out, and send him safely back to their father. But Reuben did not understand how deeply the rot had spread. The brothers agreed, their eyes cold. Joseph saw them at last, his face breaking into a smile of relief. He lifted his hand in greeting and quickened his pace. "Brothers," he called out, his voice bright with the joy of reunion. They did not return his smile. Before he could speak another word, before he could ask why their faces were so hard, they seized him. Rough hands grabbed his arms, his shoulders. He stumbled, confusion flashing across his face. What are you doing?" He gasped. They did not answer. They tore the coat from his back, the beautiful coat, the coat his father had made with such care, the coat that had marked him as beloved. They ripped it away as if it were a rag, and Joseph stood before them in his plain tunic, suddenly small, suddenly vulnerable. "Please," he whispered. "Brothers." "Why?" But they dragged him across the rocky ground toward a pit, a deep, dry cistern carved into the earth, its walls smooth and unscalable. They threw him down into the darkness. Joseph fell hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. Pain shot through his shoulder as he struck the bottom. He looked up, and all he could see was a circle of sky, impossibly far above, and the silhouettes of his brothers staring down at him. "Brothers," he cried out, his voice breaking. "Please, why are you doing this? I have done nothing to you." They turned away. Joseph screamed. He clawed at the walls, his fingers scraping uselessly against the stone. "Reuben, Simeon, Judah, please, do not leave me here." But the only answer was silence. Above, the brothers sat down to eat bread. They tore the flatbread with their hands, chewed slowly, and did not speak. The sound of Joseph's cries rose from the pit like the wail of a wounded animal, but they had trained their hearts not to hear. This was the moment when innocence died, when the boy who had dreamed of stars and sheaves learned that the world was not safe, that love could be twisted into hate, that those who should protect you could become your destroyers. Joseph wept in the darkness. His voice grew hoarse. The walls of the pit seemed to close in around him, and the sky above became a distant, unreachable promise. He did not know that his suffering had only just begun. As the brothers ate, one of them looked up and saw a caravan approaching from the east. Camels laden with goods, men with sun-darkened skin and eyes sharp with the cunning of traders. They were Ishmaelites, merchants traveling the ancient trade route from Gilead down to Egypt, carrying spices and balm and myrrh. Judah, watching them pass, had an idea. A terrible, practical, cold-blooded idea. What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? He said, his voice low. Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. The others considered this. Murder carried a weight, a stain that could not be washed away. But selling him, that was simply business. And it would rid them of the dreamer just as effectively. They agreed. They hauled Joseph out of the pit. He gasped for breath, hope flaring briefly in his chest. Perhaps they had changed their minds. Perhaps they would let him go. But then he saw the traders, and the hope died. No, Joseph whispered, his eyes widening. No, please. Brothers, do not do this. I beg you. But they bound his hands and brought him to the Ishmaelites. The merchants examined him with the detached efficiency of men who dealt in flesh as easily as in spices. Young, strong, healthy, he would fetch a good price in Egypt. They counted out 20 pieces of silver. The coins clinked as they passed from hand to hand, the sound sharp and final. Joseph's brothers took the silver and stepped back. The traders pulled Joseph away, and he twisted in their grip, his eyes locked on his brothers' faces. Judah, he cried, his voice raw with desperation. Reuben, do not let them take me. Please, I am your brother. But they turned their backs. They walked away, and Joseph was dragged into the line of camels, his wrists bound with rope, his heart shattered into pieces too small to ever be made whole again. The caravan moved south, toward Egypt, toward the unknown. Joseph looked back one last time, but his brothers were already gone, swallowed by the horizon. When Reuben returned to the pit, having been away when the sale took place, he tore his clothes in anguish. The boy is gone, he cried. Where can I turn? But the others had already prepared their lie. They took Joseph's coat, the beautiful coat of many colors, and slaughtered a young goat. They dipped the coat in the blood until it was soaked, until no one could tell whether the stains came from an animal or from something far worse. Then they brought it to their father. Jacob took the coat in trembling hands. He recognized it immediately. His face went white. It is my son's coat, he whispered. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. And Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth around his waist and mourned for his son many days. His other sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. No, he said, his voice broken. I shall go down to the grave, mourning for my son. And he wept. Far to the south, Joseph stumbled through the desert in chains, his tears drying on his cheeks under the merciless sun. Everything he had known was gone. His father's love, his home, his identity. He was no longer the favored son. He was no longer the dreamer. He was a slave. And ahead of him lay Egypt, a land of strange gods, a strange language, and a future he could not possibly imagine. But God had not forgotten him. Even in the pit, even in the chains, even in the caravan heading toward a foreign land where no one knew his name, the dreams were still true. The promises still stood. And though Joseph could not see it, could not feel it, could not believe it in that moment of utter despair, God was still with him. Every step toward Egypt was a step toward the fulfillment of everything he had seen in his sleep. But first, he would have to descend even further into the darkness. The pit had been only the beginning. Chapter 3. Slave in Egypt. The journey to Egypt was a blur of heat and dust and despair. Joseph walked in chains, his wrists rubbed raw by the rope, his feet blistered from the endless miles. The Ishmaelite traders spoke in a language he barely understood, their voices harsh and indifferent. To them, he was cargo, nothing more. At night, when they camped beneath the cold desert stars, Joseph lay on the hard ground and stared up at the sky. The stars, those same stars he had once dreamed would bow to him, now seemed impossibly distant, silent witnesses to his suffering. His prayers became whispers in the darkness, too faint for even his own ears to hear. The tears had already dried. All that remained was a hollow ache, a silence where hope used to live. The caravan crossed from Canaan into the land of Egypt, and everything changed. The desert gave way to green fields fed by the great river Nile. Joseph saw for the first time the temples rising like mountains from the earth, their columns carved with strange symbols and images of gods with animal heads, falcons, jackals, crocodiles. He saw cities larger than anything he had ever imagined, streets crowded with people whose skin was painted with kohl, whose clothes shimmered with fine linen, whose voices rose in a language that sounded like music and thunder all at once. This was Egypt, the greatest empire the world had ever known, a land of power and mystery, of wealth and cruelty, of pharaohs who called themselves gods and slaves who were worth less than cattle. And Joseph was nothing here. No one knew his name. No one knew his father was a wealthy man, a prince among his people. No one cared that he had once worn a coat of many colors. The traders brought him to the slave market in the heart of the city. Men and women stood on platforms, their bodies exposed for inspection. Buyers moved among them, checking teeth, testing muscles, haggling over prices. Joseph stood among them, his head down, his heart numb. This was what he had become. Flesh for sale. A man approached. Tall, broad-shouldered, his bearing unmistakably that of authority. His clothes were fine, his movements deliberate. This was a man accustomed to command. His name was Potiphar, and he was captain of Pharaoh's guard, one of the most powerful men in Egypt. Potiphar looked Joseph over with the calm assessment of a man who knew quality when he saw it. Despite the dirt and exhaustion, despite the hollowness in the young man's eyes, there was something about him, a strength, a dignity that had not yet been broken. Potiphar asked the trader a question in Egyptian. The trader answered, gesturing to Joseph, naming a price. The negotiation was brief. Silver changed hands, and Joseph became the property of Potiphar. He was taken to Potiphar's household, a grand estate with gardens and servants, with wealth that would have made even Jacob seem poor. But Joseph entered not through the front gates, but through the servants' entrance, led to the quarters where the slaves slept on mats on the floor. At first, he was given the lowest tasks: carrying water, cleaning floors, tending the animals, work that required no thought, no trust, no responsibility. He was watched carefully, for new slaves were often dangerous, rebellious, prone to running or theft. But Joseph did not run. He did not steal. He did not complain. He simply worked. Day after day, week after week, he poured himself into every task with a kind of quiet intensity. When he carried water, he made sure the jars were full. When he cleaned thoroughly. When he was told to do something, he did it better than required. Not because he hoped for reward, not because the dream still felt real, but because something deep within him, something his father had taught him, something the God of his fathers had planted in his soul, refused to let him become bitter, refused to let him do anything with less than his whole heart. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. The overseer of Potiphar's house noticed. This Hebrew slave was different, trustworthy, diligent. There was a quality about him that set him apart from the others. He gave Joseph more responsibility. Joseph managed it flawlessly. He gave him more. Joseph exceeded expectations. And then something remarkable happened, something the scripture describes with a single powerful phrase. The Lord was with Joseph. It was not that Joseph suddenly became lucky. It was not that circumstances magically improved. It was that in everything Joseph did there was a blessing that could not be explained by human effort alone. When Joseph managed the household stores, they seemed to multiply. When he oversaw the fields, the harvests were abundant. When he organized the servants, the household ran with a smoothness and efficiency it had never known. Potiphar saw this, and Potiphar was no fool. He recognized divine favor when he saw it. Within a few years, though, the text does not tell us exactly how long Joseph had risen from the lowest slave to the highest position in Potiphar's household. He was made overseer of everything Potiphar owned. Potiphar trusted him completely. The scripture says he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Joseph, who had been sold for 20 pieces of silver, now controlled the wealth of one of Egypt's most powerful men. It was extraordinary, unthinkable. A Hebrew slave managing the household of Pharaoh's captain of the guard with complete authority over everything. But Joseph did not let it go to his head. He did not forget where he had come from. He carried within him the memory of the pit, the chains, the marketplace. And he carried within him something else, a sense that even here, even in this strange land among these strange gods, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was still watching. The dreams seemed like echoes from another lifetime now, distant memories from a world he could barely remember. But he worked as if God were watching. He lived as if integrity still mattered, even when no one from his homeland could see. And God blessed him for it. Potiphar's household prospered beyond measure. The Egyptian people, who worshipped a pantheon of gods, could see with their own eyes that something divine rested on this young Hebrew. They did not understand it, but they could not deny it. Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. The scripture tells us he had grown from a 17-year-old boy into a man in his prime. His shoulders had broadened from labor, his features had matured, and there was about him a quiet strength, a calm authority that drew the eye. He moved through Potiphar's house with dignity, managing affairs with wisdom beyond his years. The servants respected him. The other slaves looked to him, and Potiphar trusted him implicitly. For the first time since the pit, Joseph's life had stability, purpose, even a measure of honor, though it was the honor of a slave, not a son. But Joseph had learned in the hardest way possible that stability is fragile. That honor can be stripped away in a moment, that the world is not safe, and that those who seem trustworthy can betray you without warning. He did not know that his greatest test was still ahead, that the blessing of God upon his life was about to provoke a new kind of danger, one that would not come from his brothers or from strangers, but from within the very household where he had found refuge. For Potiphar had a wife, and she had noticed Joseph too. The favor of God had lifted Joseph from the slave market to a position of trust and authority. But that same favor, that same blessing, was about to become the very thing that would cast him down again, this time into a darkness even deeper than the pit. Because temptation, when it wears the face of power, is a test that no amount of hard work can prepare you for. And Joseph, faithful and strong as he was about to face a choice that would define the rest of his life. The stage was set. The test was coming. And once again, everything Joseph had built was about to be taken away. But God was still with him, even when Joseph could not see it. Even when the path ahead led straight into the darkness of a dungeon cell, the story was far from over. Chapter 4. Temptation and False Accusation. Potiphar's house was a place of order and beauty. The courtyards were lined with date palms that rustled softly in the evening breeze. Fountains trickled with water drawn from the Nile, and the scent of lotus blossoms drifted through the air. Servants moved quietly through the halls, and everything ran with the kind of precision that comes only when someone truly capable is in charge. That someone was Joseph. He had proven himself so thoroughly, so completely, that Potiphar had entrusted everything to him. The master of the house concerned himself only with matters of state, with his position in Pharaoh's court, with military affairs and political maneuvering. The details of daily life, the management of wealth, the oversight of servants, the administration of estates, all of this rested in Joseph's hands. It was a remarkable thing. A slave with absolute authority. A foreigner managing the household of one of Egypt's elite. But the blessing of God was so evident upon Joseph that even the Egyptians could not deny it. Potiphar's wife had noticed. Her name is not recorded in Scripture. We know only her position, wife of a powerful man, mistress of a grand household, a woman accustomed to getting what she wanted. She lived in luxury, surrounded by servants who jumped at her every word, in a world where her beauty and status gave her power. And she had been watching Joseph for some time. At first, it was just a glance. The way one might notice a well-made statue or a fine piece of craftsmanship. Joseph was handsome. The Scripture is clear about this, well-built and strong, with features that caught the eye. But it was more than physical appearance. There was something about the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence, the integrity that radiated from him even when he did the simplest tasks. He was different from the other servants, different from the other men she knew. Her own husband, Potiphar, was often absent, consumed by his duties. The house was full of people, yet she was lonely in the way that only those surrounded by emptiness can be. And so the glances became longer, more deliberate, more frequent. Joseph noticed, but said nothing. He kept his eyes on his work, maintained a proper distance, conducted himself with the kind of careful respect that befits a servant in his position. He had been a slave long enough to know that boundaries were everything, that presumption could cost you your life. But Potiphar's wife was not deterred by boundaries. One day, when the household was quiet and most of the servants were occupied elsewhere, she approached Joseph directly. Her voice was low, intimate, laced with suggestion. "Come, be with me," she said. 3 words. Simple, direct, impossible to misunderstand. Joseph stepped back, his face flushing with shock and alarm. For a moment, he could not speak. Then he found his voice, and it was firm, resolute, though his heart was pounding. "Look," he said, his words carefully chosen. "My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" It was not a negotiation. It was a refusal, absolute and final. He spoke of his master's trust. Potiphar had given him everything, held back nothing. To betray that trust would be to destroy the very foundation of the honor he had been given. And more than that, more than the human betrayal, Joseph called it what it was: sin against God. Even here, in a foreign land, among people who did not know the God of Abraham, Joseph carried within him a moral compass that would not bend. He had lost his family, his home, his freedom. But he had not lost his integrity. And he would not sell it, not even for the fleeting pleasure of a moment, not even to gain favor with a powerful woman. Potiphar's wife stared at him, her eyes flashing with something between surprise and anger. She was not accustomed to being refused. Men did not say no to her. But Joseph had, and so she tried again. The next day, and the day after that. Every time she found him alone, she spoke to him, her words growing bolder, more insistent. "Come, be with me." And every time, Joseph refused. He did not waver. He did not entertain the idea, even for a moment. He avoided being alone with her when he could, kept conversations brief, maintained his distance. But she was relentless. Day after day, the temptation was there, spoken aloud, hanging in the air like a trap waiting to spring shut. Most men would have fallen. The scripture does not shy away from this reality. Joseph was human, with all the desires and weaknesses that come with flesh and blood. And here was a beautiful woman, a woman of power and status, offering herself to him freely. No one would have known. Potiphar was often gone. The household was large, full of places to hide a secret. But Joseph did not measure his choices by what he could get away with. He measured them by what was right before God. And so he resisted. Day after day, week after week. The steady, grinding pressure of temptation that did not come once in a dramatic moment, but returned again and again, wearing down his resolve like water against stone. Then came the day when everything collapsed. The house was empty, or nearly so. Most of the servants had been sent on errands or were working in the outer courts. Potiphar was away on official business. It was one of those rare moments when the grand estate felt almost deserted, the rooms echoing with silence. Joseph was inside, attending to his duties. He did not know that Potiphar's wife had orchestrated this moment, had arranged for the house to be cleared, had been waiting for precisely this opportunity. She found him alone in one of the inner rooms. And this time, she did not speak. She reached out and grabbed his garment, her fingers clutching the fabric, her voice urgent and commanding. "Come, be with me." Joseph pulled back, his heart hammering in his chest. But she held tight, her grip strong, her eyes fierce with desire and anger, and something darker, a determination that would not be denied. He had only one choice. In that split second, with her hand on his cloak and her body close to his, Joseph made the decision that would cost him everything. He tore himself away. The garment ripped from his shoulders and stayed in her hand as he turned and fled. He ran from the room, through the halls, out into the courtyard, his chest heaving, his mind reeling. He had escaped, but he had left his cloak behind. And Potiphar's wife stood there, holding the garment in her hands, her face twisted with rage. She had been refused, humiliated, rejected by a slave. The fury rose in her like a flood, and in that moment, she made a choice of her own. If she could not have him, she would destroy him. She began to scream, high, piercing cries that brought the servants running. They found her clutching Joseph's garment, her face flushed, her voice trembling with manufactured terror. "Look," she cried, her words spilling out in a torrent of lies. "My husband brought this Hebrew slave to us to mock us. He came in to me to force himself upon me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that, I lifted up my voice and cried out. He left his garment beside me and fled outside." The servants stared, shock and confusion on their faces. Joseph, the overseer they respected, the man who had managed the household so faithfully, could this be true? But they were servants. They could not question their mistress. They could only listen as she repeated the story, her voice growing more confident, more convincing with each retelling. She kept Joseph's garment beside her until Potiphar came home. And when he arrived, she met him with tears and rage and the same venomous lie. "The Hebrew servant, whom you have brought among us, came in to me to force himself upon me," she said, holding up the cloak like evidence. "But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." Potiphar listened. His face darkened. The scripture does not tell us what he thought, whether he fully believed his wife or whether some part of him suspected the truth. He knew Joseph. He had trusted him with everything. He had seen the blessing of God upon him. But his wife had accused him publicly. The servants had heard. If Potiphar did nothing, his honor would be destroyed. In Egypt, in that culture, a man who could not control his household, who could not protect his wife or punish an offending slave, was no man at all. And so, whether he believed it or not, Potiphar had no choice. His anger burned, the scripture says. He called for his guards. And Joseph, who had done nothing but flee from sin, was seized and bound. He did not protest. He did not defend himself. What could he say? His word, the word of a slave, against the word of Potiphar's wife. There was no trial, no investigation, no chance to speak the truth. He was guilty the moment she accused him. Potiphar could have had him executed. That would have been the expected punishment for such a crime. But perhaps some part of him held back. Perhaps he remembered the years of faithful service, the inexplicable blessing that had rested on his household since Joseph arrived. Or perhaps he simply wanted the problem to disappear quietly. Instead of death, Potiphar sent Joseph to prison. Not just any prison, but the royal prison, the place where Pharaoh's own prisoners were kept. A dungeon reserved for those who had offended the crown, a place from which few ever emerged. Joseph was dragged away in chains for the second time in his life. The household he had managed so carefully, the position he had earned through years of faithfulness, the small measure of dignity he had clawed back from the pit, all of it was gone in a single day. And this time, it was not his brothers who had betrayed him. It was his own integrity. His refusal to sin had cost him everything. As the prison doors closed behind him and the darkness swallowed him whole, Joseph had every reason to believe that God had abandoned him, that the dreams were lies, that righteousness was a fool's errand. He had done everything right. He had resisted temptation. He had honored God. And this was his reward: chains, darkness, and a cell with no hope of release. But even here, even in the depths of Pharaoh's dungeon, the truth remained. The Lord was with Joseph. He just could not see it yet. Chapter 5. The Forgotten Prisoner. The prison was not like the pit. The pit had been empty, silent, a hole in the earth, where the only sound was Joseph's own voice echoing off stone walls. But the royal prison was full of men, full of suffering, full of the kind of darkness that comes not from the absence of light, but from the presence of despair. Joseph was thrown into a cell with other prisoners, men who had fallen from power or displeased Pharaoh in some way. Some were guilty of real crimes. Others, like Joseph, were victims of false accusations, political maneuvering, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The air was thick and stale. The floors were cold. Iron bars separated them from the world above, where life continued without them, where the sun rose and set, and no one remembered their names. Joseph sat in the corner, his wrists bruised from the shackles, his heart heavy with a weight that had nothing to do with chains. This was worse than slavery. At least as a slave, he had been able to work, to prove himself, to see the results of his labor. Here, there was nothing. No purpose. No future. Just the slow, grinding passage of time. He had lost everything twice now. Once to his brothers, and once to a lie. And yet, as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, something within Joseph refused to break. He did not rage. He did not curse God. He simply endured, with a quiet strength that came from somewhere deeper than circumstances. The keeper of the prison noticed. Just as Potiphar's overseer had noticed, just as Potiphar himself had noticed. There was something about Joseph that set him apart. He was not like the other prisoners who spent their days in bitterness or hopelessness. Joseph helped where he could. He spoke kindly. When arguments broke out, he mediated. When someone was sick, he tended to them. He carried himself with a dignity that prison could not strip away. And once again, the scripture records that simple, mysterious phrase, "The Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison." The keeper began to trust him, first with small tasks, then with larger responsibilities. Eventually, Joseph was given charge over all the prisoners, managing the daily affairs of the dungeon, just as he had once managed Potiphar's household. It was a strange kind of promotion, from slave to overseer to prisoner to prison trustee. But even here, even in a place designed to crush hope, the blessing of God rested on Joseph. And then one day, everything changed. 2 new prisoners arrived. They were not ordinary men. One was the chief cupbearer to Pharaoh, the man who tasted the king's wine to ensure it was not poisoned. The other was the chief baker, responsible for Pharaoh's bread. Both had offended Pharaoh in some way, the scripture does not say how, and both had been thrown into the royal prison to await his judgment. They were placed under Joseph's care. He attended to them, brought them food, saw to their needs. Days passed, and the 2 men settled into the grim routine of prison life, their faces growing hollow with worry. Then came the night of the dreams. Joseph came to them one morning and found both men sitting in their cells, their faces troubled, their eyes distant. "Why are your faces downcast today?" Joseph asked. They looked at him, and the cupbearer spoke first. "We have both had dreams," he said, "and there is no one to interpret them. In Egypt, dreams were taken very seriously. They were believed to be messages from the gods, glimpses into the future. But interpreting them required skill, wisdom, and often the services of trained priests or magicians, none of which were available in a prison cell." Joseph looked at the 2 men, and something stirred within him. He had not thought about his own dreams in years. They seemed like relics from another life, promises that had turned to ash. But he remembered what his father had taught him about God, that he was the revealer of mysteries, the one who knew the beginning from the end. "Do not interpretations belong to God?" Joseph said gently. "Tell them to me, please." The cupbearer went first. "In my dream," he said, "there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." Joseph listened, and as the cupbearer spoke, understanding came to him clear, certain, like a light turning on in a dark room. "This is its interpretation," Joseph said. "The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand, as formerly, when you were his cupbearer." The cupbearer's face brightened with hope. 3 days. Restoration. A return to his former position. It was more than he had dared to hope for. Joseph paused, then added quietly, "Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit." It was a simple request, a plea from a man who had been wronged, who had suffered unjustly, who wanted nothing more than to be free. The cupbearer nodded, his eyes full of gratitude. Then the baker spoke. He had been listening, and seeing that the interpretation for the cupbearer was favorable, he leaned forward eagerly. "I also had a dream," he said. "There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh. But the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head." Joseph's face grew still. The interpretation came to him just as clearly as the first. But this time, there was no joy in it. He took a breath and spoke gently, his voice filled with compassion. "This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, because that is exactly what they were. The baker's face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. What could he say? He had asked for the interpretation, and Joseph had given it. There was no malice in Joseph's voice, no satisfaction, only sorrow for a man whose fate was already sealed. 3 days passed. Joseph waited, his heart cautiously hopeful. Perhaps the cupbearer would remember. Perhaps, at last, someone would speak up for him, and this nightmare would end. On the 3rd day, it was Pharaoh's birthday. The king held a great feast for all his servants, and in the midst of the celebration, he summoned both the cupbearer and the baker. Everything happened exactly as Joseph had said. The cupbearer was restored to his position. He placed Pharaoh's cup in the king's hand once more, and his heart was light with relief and gratitude. The baker was hanged. The birds came, just as Joseph had foretold. And Joseph waited in his cell, listening for footsteps, for the sound of his name being called, for the cupbearer to remember his promise. But the cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He returned to his duties, to his life at court, to the abundance and privilege of serving Pharaoh. And in the busyness and comfort of his restored position, Joseph slipped from his mind. The scripture says it plainly, with a simplicity that cuts deep. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Days passed, then weeks, then months, and still Joseph sat in prison, wondering if anyone in the world remembered his name. Chapter 6. 2 more years of waiting. 1 month became 2. Joseph marked the passage of time not by the sun, which he could barely see through the narrow slot high in the prison wall, but by the rhythm of meals, the changing of guards, the slow procession of faces that came and went. 2 months became 6. The cupbearer had been restored. The baker had been executed. And Joseph remained in the darkness, his brief moment of hope fading like morning mist under the desert sun. 6 months became a year. The prisoners around him changed. Some were released. Others were executed. Most simply remained, their bodies growing thin, their spirits wearing away. Joseph helped where he could, managed the daily affairs of the prison, and waited. 1 year became 2. 730 days. 730 nights. Each one a test of endurance, a crucible of faith, a silent question hanging in the air. Has God forgotten you? Joseph did not know the answer. Some days, he believed God was still there, still watching, still working in ways too mysterious to see. Other days, the silence felt absolute, as if heaven itself had turned its back. But even on those days, he did not allow bitterness to take root. He simply endured. The other prisoners watched him and wondered, how could a man lose everything twice and still wake each morning with purpose? How could he serve without reward, give without receiving, hope without evidence? Joseph could not have explained it himself. He only knew that to stop caring, to stop serving, to stop being who he was meant to be, that would be a deeper prison than any dungeon Pharaoh could build. And so, he worked. He mediated disputes. He tended the sick. He spoke words of comfort to men whose despair had grown as thick as the walls around them. And he prayed, not eloquent prayers, not loud declarations of faith, just whispers in the darkness. Sometimes they were pleas for deliverance. Sometimes they were simply acknowledgments that God was still there, even when Joseph could not feel his presence. "I am still here," Joseph would whisper into the silence, "and I trust that you are too." The seasons changed outside, though Joseph could barely sense them. The Nile flooded and receded. Crops were planted and harvested. Pharaohs held their festivals, and the priests made their offerings. And life in Egypt continued with all its power and pageantry. And Joseph remained in the darkness, unknown and forgotten. But God had not forgotten. During those 2 years, Joseph had time to think. Too much time, perhaps. The memories came unbidden in the quiet hours, his father's face, the coat of many colors, the sound of his brother's laughter, before it turned to hatred. He remembered the pit, the terror of being sold, the long journey to Egypt in chains. He remembered Potiphar's house, and the brief, beautiful moment when he had thought perhaps his life could be rebuilt. And then the false accusation, the look on Potiphar's face, the cold finality of the prison doors closing behind him. In those long nights, Joseph wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. Why had God allowed all of this? The dreams seemed like echoes from another lifetime now, promises so distant they might as well have belonged to someone else. But Joseph did not receive answers, only silence. Yet in that silence, something was being forged. Something stronger than the boy who had dreamed of stars bowing down. Something deeper than the slave who had managed Potiphar's household. Joseph was learning what it meant to trust God, not because of what he gave, but because of who he was. Not because life made sense, but because even in the senselessness, even in the injustice, there was a thread of purpose too fine to see but too strong to break. The other prisoners sometimes asked him about his God. They knew he was a Hebrew, that he worshipped differently than the Egyptians with their animal-headed gods and elaborate rituals. "Does your God know you are here?" one prisoner asked once, his voice rough with cynicism. "Does he care that you rot in this hole?" Joseph was quiet for a long moment. Then he said simply, "He knows. And yes, he cares. I do not understand his ways, but I have seen his hand too many times to believe he has left me now." It was not a theological argument. It was the testimony of a man who had been stripped of everything except faith, and who had discovered that faith alone, when everything else is gone, is enough to stand on. The 2 years were not wasted, though they felt like it. They were preparation, a stripping away of pride, of self-reliance, of any belief that Joseph's own cleverness or effort could save him. If he was going to be used by God for something great, he first had to learn that greatness does not come from human strength, but from complete dependence on the one who holds all things in his hands. And so Joseph waited through 500 days, 600, 700, each one a test of endurance, a crucible of character, a silent question. Will you still trust me when everything says I have abandoned you? And somehow, by grace, Joseph's answer remained yes. He did not know that above him, in the palace of Pharaoh, something was stirring, that the most powerful man in the world was about to have dreams that would shake his throne and send tremors through all of Egypt. He did not know that in just a few more days, his name would be spoken in the halls of power, that he would be summoned from the dungeon, that everything was about to change in a way so sudden and complete it would leave him breathless. He only knew that today was another day in prison, and that tomorrow would likely be the same, and that somehow, in the midst of that endless sameness, he had to keep choosing faith over despair, hope over bitterness, trust over doubt. The forgotten prisoner did not know he was about to be remembered, not by the cupbearer, but by God himself. And when God remembers, kingdoms tremble, destinies shift, and prison doors swing open as if they were never locked at all. The waiting was almost over. But Joseph, sitting in his cell on what seemed like just another ordinary morning, had no way of knowing that the day of deliverance was finally at hand. The longest night was ending, and the dawn, brilliant, sudden, unstoppable, was about to break. Chapter 7.
Okay, we're about halfway through. I'm gonna stop for a break so that you guys can get a drink, walk your dog, and I will play one of my videos, my guitar video that I put up yesterday. Good to see you, Ruby. Thanks for coming in. So we're going to take a 5-7 minute break, and let me go to my channel. It's about a 6-minute video, so this will give you guys some time to do whatever. I'm back. All right. Are we ready for part two? I know I am. All right. We will continue with the show, with the story of Joseph.
Pharaoh's dreams. In the royal palace, in chambers adorned with gold and precious stones, where the air was perfumed with frankincense and myrrh, Pharaoh lay sleeping on his bed. He was the most powerful man in the known world. The living god, they called him, the son of Ra, the embodiment of divine authority on earth. His word was law. His decree was fate. Nations trembled at his command, and his armies had never known defeat. But on this night, the god-king was troubled. He dreamed. In his dream, Pharaoh stood by the Nile, the great river that was the lifeblood of Egypt, the source of all prosperity and power. The water was calm, reflecting the sky like polished bronze. Then, from the river, 7 cows emerged. They were fat and sleek, their bodies healthy and strong, their coats gleaming in the sunlight. They came up out of the water and began to graze in the reed grass along the bank, peaceful and content. But then 7 other cows came up after them. These were ugly and thin, their ribs showing through their skin, their movements weak and stumbling. They were wretched creatures, the kind that should not have been able to stand, let alone walk. And as Pharaoh watched in horror, the thin cows devoured the fat cows. They consumed them completely, and yet their appearance did not change. They remained as ugly and thin as before, as if they had eaten nothing at all. Pharaoh woke with a start, his heart pounding, sweat beading on his forehead. The images lingered in his mind, the healthy cows, the diseased ones, the terrible, unnatural devouring. He tried to calm himself. It was only a dream. He turned over and closed his eyes, willing himself back to sleep. But he dreamed again. This time, he saw a single stalk of grain growing from the earth. And on that stalk were 7 heads of grain, plump and good, full of kernels and heavy with promise. Then 7 other heads sprouted after them, thin and blighted by the east wind, shriveled and worthless. And the thin heads swallowed up the 7 plump and full heads. Pharaoh woke again, and this time he could not return to sleep. He sat up, his mind racing. The dreams were too vivid, too specific, too strange to be meaningless. In Egypt, dreams were not dismissed as mere fantasies of the sleeping mind. They were messages from the gods, warnings, prophecies. And these dreams felt heavy with meaning, though Pharaoh could not grasp what it was. When morning came, he summoned all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. They came quickly, robed in their ceremonial garments, carrying their scrolls and amulets and instruments of divination. These were the men trained in the sacred arts, the interpreters of signs, the mediators between gods and mortals. Pharaoh told them his dreams. He described the cows and the grain in careful detail, watching their faces for any sign of understanding. But there was none. The magicians consulted their scrolls. They muttered incantations, cast their lots, studied the patterns of oil on water and the entrails of sacrificed birds. They debated among themselves in low voices, their faces growing more troubled with each passing moment. Finally, the chief magician stepped forward and bowed low. "O Pharaoh, life, prosperity, health be unto you," he said, his voice carefully measured. "The dreams are profound, but their meaning is hidden. We cannot interpret them." Pharaoh's face darkened. These were the wisest men in Egypt, the keepers of ancient knowledge, the servants of the gods themselves. And they had no answer. A heavy silence fell over the throne room. The courtiers shifted uneasily. No one wanted to be present when Pharaoh's frustration turned to anger. And then, in that silence, one voice spoke up, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. It was the chief cupbearer. He stepped forward, his face pale, and fell to his knees before Pharaoh. "I remember my offenses today," he said. "When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation." Pharaoh leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Go on." "A young Hebrew was there with us," the cupbearer continued. "A servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him our dreams, he interpreted them to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. The throne room was utterly still. Every eye was on the cupbearer, and then on Pharaoh. The king's face was unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice sharp and commanding. "Bring him to me." Now, messengers were sent running. Orders were shouted. And in the depths of the royal prison, where Joseph had spent the last 2 years waiting, forgotten and alone, a guard suddenly appeared at his cell. "You," the guard barked, "come with me. Pharaoh has summoned you." Joseph looked up, confusion flickering across his face. Pharaoh? Why would Pharaoh summon him? He had been forgotten. The cupbearer had not remembered. And yet, there was no time to think. The guard unlocked the cell and pulled him to his feet. Other servants appeared, carrying razors, clean clothes, bowls of water. "You cannot appear before Pharaoh like this," one of them said, wrinkling his nose at Joseph's appearance. His beard had grown long, his hair unkempt, his clothes little more than rags. They shaved him quickly, roughly, scraping away the beard and cutting his hair in the Egyptian style. They gave him clean linen to wear, simple but decent. And then, before Joseph could fully grasp what was happening, he was being led through corridors he had never seen, up stairs that climbed toward the light. His eyes, accustomed to the dimness of the prison, squinted against the brightness as he emerged into the open air. The palace rose before him, vast and magnificent, its columns painted with scenes of gods and kings, its walls gleaming with inlaid gold. He was brought into the throne room, and suddenly Joseph stood before Pharaoh himself. The god-king of Egypt, seated on a throne of gold, surrounded by courtiers and priests and guards, all watching him with curious, skeptical eyes. Joseph fell to his knees and bowed low, his forehead touching the cool marble floor. Pharaoh studied him. A Hebrew slave, a prisoner. This was the man the cupbearer had remembered. This was the one who could interpret dreams when all the wisdom of Egypt had failed. "I have had a dream," Pharaoh said, his voice echoing through the hall, "and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph lifted his head. He could feel the weight of every eye upon him, the skepticism, the doubt. He was a foreigner, a prisoner, a nobody. But in this moment, he knew exactly what to say. "It is not in me," Joseph said clearly, his voice steady and sure. "God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Not I can interpret it. Not I am wise. But God, the God of the Hebrews, the God who had been with Joseph in the pit, in slavery, in prison, the God who had never left him, even when it felt like he had." Pharaoh paused, something flickering in his eyes. Then he began to speak, recounting the dreams with the same careful detail he had given the magicians. The 7 fat cows and the 7 thin cows, the 7 plump heads of grain and the 7 blighted ones, the devouring that left no trace. Joseph listened, and as Pharaoh spoke, understanding came to him. Not from his own mind, not from training or wisdom or cleverness. It came like light breaking through clouds, clear and undeniable. When Pharaoh finished, the throne room fell silent. Waiting, Joseph took a breath and spoke. "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same," he said. "God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do." And then, with a clarity and authority that seemed to come from beyond himself, Joseph laid out the interpretation. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty heads of grain blighted by the east wind are also 7 years of famine. Pharaoh leaned forward, his eyes intent. "Behold," Joseph continued, "there are coming 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe." The courtiers murmured, their faces troubled. 7 years of famine, after 7 years of abundance. It was unthinkable. Egypt was the breadbasket of the world, fed by the Nile, protected by the gods. But Joseph was not finished. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Fixed by God. Not a possibility, but a certainty. Not a warning to be debated, but a decree to be prepared for. And then Joseph did something extraordinary. He did not stop at interpretation. He stepped forward with wisdom, with counsel, with a plan. "Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land, and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine." It was bold. It was audacious. A prisoner, standing before the most powerful man in the world, not only interpreting his dreams but telling him what to do. But it was also brilliant, practical, the kind of wisdom that could save a nation. Pharaoh stared at Joseph for a long moment. The entire court held its breath. Then the king turned to his servants and said, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God?" No one answered. The question hung in the air, rhetorical and profound. Pharaoh turned back to Joseph. "Since God has shown you all this," he said, "there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you." The courtiers gasped. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Pharaoh was elevating a Hebrew prisoner, a slave, to the 2nd highest position in all of Egypt. But Pharaoh was not finished. He removed his signet ring from his hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. He clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. "See," Pharaoh declared, his voice ringing with authority, "I have set you over all the land of Egypt." And just like that, in the span of a single morning, Joseph went from forgotten prisoner to second in command of the greatest empire on earth. Chapter 8. From Prison to Palace. The world had turned upside down in a single morning. Joseph stood in the throne room, no longer in the simple garments they had hastily given him when he was pulled from prison, but clothed in fine linen woven so delicately it seemed to shimmer in the light. The gold chain around his neck was heavy, a tangible reminder that this was not a dream. and on his finger the signet ring of Pharaoh himself, the seal of absolute authority in all of Egypt. Just hours ago, he had been a forgotten prisoner. Now, courtiers bowed before him. Servants waited for his commands. The most powerful men in Egypt watched him with a mixture of awe, confusion, and barely concealed resentment. Pharaoh made the proclamation official. He had Joseph ride in his second chariot, and as Joseph passed through the streets of the capital, runners went before him crying out, "Bow the knee," and all the people bowed. Joseph looked out at the masses kneeling before him, Egyptians, the people who had enslaved him, who had imprisoned him, who had not known his name yesterday, and he felt no triumph. Only a deep, overwhelming awareness that he was standing in the middle of something far greater than himself. Pharaoh gave him a new name, Zaphenath-Paneah, which in the Egyptian language meant God speaks. He lives, or revealer of secrets. It was a name that honored not Joseph himself, but the God who had given him the interpretation. And Pharaoh gave him a wife. Her name was Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. She was beautiful, refined, educated in the ways of Egyptian nobility. Their marriage was arranged immediately. A public declaration that Joseph was now fully integrated into the highest levels of Egyptian society. Joseph was 30 years old. 13 years had passed since his brothers threw him into the pit. 13 years of slavery, false accusation, imprisonment, and waiting. 13 years of learning, suffering, and being shaped by forces beyond his control. But now, standing at the right hand of Pharaoh, those years made sense in a way they never had before. Every trial had prepared him for this moment. Every injustice had taught him something he would need. The pit had taught him dependence on God. Potiphar's house had taught him administration and integrity. The false accusation had taught him that righteousness does not always bring immediate reward. The prison had taught him patience, humility, and trust in God's timing. He was ready. Not because he was extraordinary, but because God had made him ready. Joseph set to work immediately. There was no time to waste. 7 years of abundance were coming, and they had to be prepared for the 7 years of famine that would follow. He traveled throughout all the land of Egypt, assessing the resources, meeting with local officials, establishing a network of storehouses in every major city. He appointed overseers, men he could trust to carry out the plan with precision and honesty. When the harvests began, they were extraordinary. The land produced grain in abundance beyond anything anyone had seen before. The Nile flooded at exactly the right times, the weather was perfect, and the fields yielded crops so plentiful that farmers could hardly believe it. And Joseph was ready. He implemented the plan he had given to Pharaoh. 1/5 of all grain was collected and stored in massive storehouses built for this purpose. In every city, great structures rose, filled to overflowing with wheat and barley. The people grumbled at first. Why should they give up a portion of their harvest when times were so good? But Joseph was firm, and Pharaoh's authority stood behind him. The grain was collected, measured, recorded, and stored. Year after year, the abundance continued. The storehouses filled until Joseph stopped measuring the grain. It was like the sand of the sea, beyond counting. During these years of plenty, Asenath bore Joseph 2 sons. When the first was born, Joseph held the tiny child in his arms and felt something break open inside him, a well of emotion he had kept sealed for so long. He named the boy Manasseh, which means God has made me forget. Not forget the pain, exactly, but the bitterness of it. For God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house, Joseph said. It was true. Standing in his position of power, with a wife who honored him and a son in his arms, the wounds of the past had lost their sting. He could remember what his brothers did without being consumed by hatred. He could think of his father without drowning in grief. The memory remained, but its power to torment him was gone. When the second son was born, Joseph named him Ephraim, meaning God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Because this place, Egypt, the land where he had been a slave and a prisoner, had become the place where God blessed him beyond measure. The 7 years of plenty passed quickly. Joseph watched the seasons turn, the harvests come and go, the storehouses fill. He managed the affairs of Egypt with wisdom and justice, and the people came to respect him, though many still whispered behind his back about the strange Hebrew who had risen so impossibly high. Then, in the 8th year, the rains did not come. At first, it seemed like a normal variation in weather, but as weeks became months, and the Nile's flood was lower than expected, and the crops began to wither in the fields, the people realized with growing horror that Joseph's interpretation had been correct. The famine had begun. It started in Egypt, but it did not end there. The same drought that afflicted Egypt spread across all the surrounding lands: Canaan, Syria, Arabia. Everywhere, the ground cracked under the relentless sun, the wells ran dry, and the people began to go hungry. In Egypt, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. What he says to you, do." Joseph opened the storehouses. The grain that had been collected during the years of plenty was now distributed, sold at fair prices to the people who desperately needed it. Joseph managed the distribution with the same careful attention he had given to the collection, ensuring that the grain was used wisely, that none was wasted, that the supply would last. And people came not only from Egypt, but from all the surrounding nations. When they heard that there was grain in Egypt, they traveled for weeks across the desert, bringing silver and goods to trade for food. Joseph stood at the center of it all, the man who held the power of life and death in his hands. If he closed the storehouses, people would starve. If he opened them wisely, millions would survive. It was an awesome responsibility, and Joseph carried it with a humility that came from knowing he was not the source of the wisdom or the provision. He was simply the instrument God had chosen to use. But as the famine deepened and spread, as more and more people came from farther and farther away, Joseph began to realize something. The famine had reached Canaan, which meant his father was hungry. His brothers were hungry. And if they were hungry, they would do what everyone else was doing. They would come to Egypt. They would come to buy grain. They would come to him. Joseph did not know when it would happen, but he knew it would. And when that day came, he would be face to face with the men who had sold him into slavery, who had torn him from his father's arms, who had left him to die in a pit. What would he do? What would he say? Would he reveal himself? Would he take revenge? Would he forgive? Joseph did not know. But as he stood in the palace, clothed in fine linen with Pharaoh's ring on his finger, he thought of his father's face and wondered if Jacob was still alive. He thought of Benjamin, his only full brother, the son of Rachel, and wondered if he was well. And he waited, because somewhere, deep in his heart, he knew that the greatest test was still ahead. That all the suffering, all the elevation, all the preparation, it had all been leading to a moment he could not yet see, but could feel approaching like a storm on the horizon. The dreams from his youth, the sheaves bowing down, the stars and sun and moon they had seemed like foolish fantasies for so long. But now, standing at the pinnacle of power in Egypt, Joseph began to wonder if perhaps after all these years, those dreams were about to come true. Not in the way he had imagined as a boy. Not with the arrogance of youth or the desire for glory, but in a way that would break his heart and heal it at the same time. In a way that would test everything he had become. in a way that would reveal whether the man who had suffered so much could also find it in himself to forgive. The stage was set. The storehouses were full. The famine was spreading. And somewhere to the north, in the land of Canaan, 10 brothers were about to make a decision that would change everything. They were about to come to Egypt, and when they did, they would bow before the man they did not recognize, the brother they had betrayed, the dreamer they had tried to destroy. And Joseph would have to decide who he had become in all these years of suffering and elevation, whether he was a man of revenge or a man of mercy, whether he would use his power to destroy or to save. The answer would not come easily, but it would come. And when it did, it would reveal the deepest truth about the God who had been with Joseph all along, that his plans are always greater than human pain, that his purposes transcend human understanding, and that what man intends for evil, God can transform into the greatest good. Chapter 9. The brothers come to Egypt. In the land of Canaan, the sun beat down on cracked earth. The fields that should have been green with growing grain were brown and barren. The flocks grew thin, their ribs showing as they searched for pasture that no longer existed. Jacob sat at the entrance of his tent, his face weathered by age and grief. He was an old man now, bent by the weight of years and sorrow. 22 years had passed since Joseph had disappeared. 22 years of mourning for the son he believed had been torn apart by wild animals. He still kept Joseph's bloodied coat, though it pained him to look at it. Some griefs do not fade with time, they simply become part of who you are, woven into the fabric of your soul. But now there was a new grief pressing upon him, hunger. The famine had come to Canaan just as it had come to every land, and Jacob's household was running out of food. His sons came to him one day, their faces grim. "Father," they said, "we have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Should we sit here and die? Let us go down and buy grain, that we may live and not die." Jacob looked at his 10 sons, all of them except Benjamin, Rachel's other son, the only child of Joseph's mother who remained. Benjamin was young, precious beyond measure to the old man. If he lost Benjamin too, Jacob knew it would kill him. "Go," Jacob said finally. "Go down to Egypt and buy grain for us. But Benjamin shall not go with you, for I fear that harm might happen to him." The brothers exchanged glances but said nothing. They had learned long ago not to speak of what had really happened to Joseph. The lie they had told their father had become a prison they carried with them every day. They loaded their donkeys and set out for Egypt, joining the streams of other travelers, making the long journey to the only place where food could still be found. The journey took weeks. They traveled through lands ravaged by drought, past dried-up wells and abandoned villages, until finally they saw in the distance the green valley of the Nile and the great cities of Egypt, rising from the desert. When they arrived, they were directed to the central distribution point where grain was being sold. They had heard that the vizier of Egypt himself, the man second only to Pharaoh, was personally overseeing the distribution to foreign buyers. They did not think much of it. They were simple shepherds from Canaan. Why would a man of such power pay attention to them? They entered the great hall where the grain distribution was managed. And there, seated on a raised platform, dressed in fine linen with a gold chain around his neck, sat the vizier of Egypt. The brothers approached and bowed low, their faces to the ground, just as protocol demanded when appearing before Egyptian nobility. Joseph saw them the moment they entered. He would have known them anywhere, the way they walked, the set of their shoulders, even after more than 2 decades. His heart began to pound so hard he thought everyone in the room must hear it. There they were, the men who had stripped him of his coat, thrown him into a pit, and sold him into slavery. The brothers who had broken their father's heart with a lie and condemned Joseph to 13 years of suffering. And they were bowing before him, just as the dream had foretold. The sheaves were bowing down. Joseph's face remained impassive. Years of managing Potiphar's household and running the affairs of Egypt had taught him to control his expression, to hide his emotions behind a mask of authority. The brothers did not recognize him. How could they? The last time they had seen him, he was 17, beardless, wearing a coat of many colors. Now he was 39, clean-shaven in the Egyptian manner, dressed as an Egyptian lord, speaking through an interpreter. The boy they had betrayed no longer existed. In his place stood a man they could never have imagined. Joseph spoke to them harshly through the interpreter, his voice sharp and accusing. "Where do you come from?" They answered, still bowing, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." Joseph stared at them, his mind racing. He could reveal himself right now. He could say, "I am Joseph, your brother whom you sold into Egypt." He could watch their faces turn white with terror. He could have them thrown into prison or worse. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was the memory of his own suffering, the knowledge of what it felt like to be powerless and afraid. Or perhaps it was something deeper, a need to know whether they had changed, whether they were still the same men who had sold their brother without remorse. "You are spies," Joseph said, his voice cold. "You have come to see the nakedness of the land." The brothers looked up, shock and fear on their faces. "No, my lord," they protested. "Your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies." "No," Joseph insisted. "You have come to see the nakedness of the land." They fell over themselves trying to explain. "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more. One is no more." The words hit Joseph like a physical blow. That was how they spoke of him, as if he had simply ceased to exist, as if he had been erased from the family, from memory, from life itself. But they had mentioned Benjamin. "The youngest is with our father." So Benjamin was alive, and their father Jacob was alive too. Joseph's heart surged with emotion, but he forced himself to remain cold. "It is as I said to you," he declared. "You are spies. By this you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you, and let him bring your brother, while you remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you. Or else, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." And he put them all together in custody for 3 days. The brothers were thrown into a holding cell, a place not unlike the pit where they had once left Joseph. For 3 days they sat in that darkness, fear gnawing at them, wondering what would happen. And in that darkness, the guilt they had carried for 22 years finally surfaced. "In truth, we are guilty concerning our brother," one of them said, his voice heavy with remorse. "We saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we would not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." Reuben, the eldest, spoke up. "Did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you would not listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood." They did not know that Joseph was listening. They did not know he could understand their language, that he did not need the interpreter for this. They thought they were speaking privately, pouring out their guilt in the darkness. And Joseph, standing outside the cell, listening to his brothers finally confess what they had done, turned away and wept. Not tears of bitterness or revenge, but tears of something more complicated, sorrow for what was lost, relief that they had not forgotten, and a deep, aching longing for the family he had been torn from. But he was not ready to reveal himself. Not yet. There was still Benjamin. He needed to see his younger brother, to know that he was safe, to know that his father had not suffered another loss. On the third day, Joseph had them brought before him again. "Do this and you will live," he said, "for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined here, while the rest of you go and carry grain for the famine of your households. But bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die." The brothers agreed, though their faces were pale with fear. They chose Simeon to remain behind as hostage, and Joseph had him bound before their eyes and taken away. Then Joseph did something that would mystify them. He commanded his servants to fill their sacks with grain, and to put each man's silver back in the mouth of his sack, along with provisions for the journey. The brothers loaded their donkeys and left Egypt, their hearts heavy with worry for Simeon and dread about how they would explain to their father that they needed to bring Benjamin back to Egypt. When they stopped to rest for the night, one of them opened his sack to give his donkey fodder, and there was his silver, returned to him. His heart failed him, and he turned trembling to his brothers. "My silver has been put back," he cried. "Here it is in the mouth of my sack." Their hearts sank, and they turned trembling to one another. "What is this that God has done to us?" they whispered. They arrived back in Canaan and went to Jacob. They told him everything, how the man who was lord of the land had spoken roughly to them, accused them of being spies, kept Simeon in custody, and demanded that they bring Benjamin to prove their honesty. Then, as they emptied their sacks, every man's bundle of silver fell out. The sight of the returned money terrified them all. Jacob looked at his sons, his face gray with anguish. "You have bereaved me of my children," he said, his voice breaking. "Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin. All this has come against me." Reuben tried to reassure him. "You may kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you." But Jacob shook his head. "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm should happen to him on the journey you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol." And so they waited. The grain they had brought from Egypt sustained them for a time, but as the famine continued and their supplies dwindled, it became clear that they would have to return. And this time, they would have to bring Benjamin with them, whether Jacob was willing or not, because the alternative was starvation. Far away in Egypt, Joseph waited too. He had seen his brothers. He had heard their confession. He knew they carried guilt for what they had done. But the real test was still ahead. Would they protect Benjamin? Or would they abandon him as they had abandoned Joseph? And somewhere in the depths of his heart, Joseph wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. Could he forgive them? Should he? What did God want from him in this impossible situation? He did not know. But he knew that when his brothers returned, when they brought Benjamin with them, the moment of truth would come. And everything, the dreams, the pit, the slavery, the prison, the palace, all of it had been leading to that moment. Chapter 10. The Silver Cup. The grain ran out. Jacob watched as the last of the sacks were emptied, the last measure of wheat poured into jars, and he knew what was coming. His sons had been avoiding his eyes for days, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them like a storm waiting to break. Finally, Judah stepped forward. He was not the eldest that was Reuben, but he had become the spokesman, the one the others looked to when difficult things needed to be said. "Father," Judah said quietly, "the man solemnly warned us, saying, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.'" Jacob's voice was sharp with anguish. "Why did you treat me so badly as to tell the man that you had another brother?" The brothers shifted uncomfortably. "The man questioned us carefully about ourselves and our kindred," they explained. He asked, "Is your father still alive? Do you have another brother?" We simply answered his questions. "How could we know?" he would say. "Bring your brother down." The silence that followed was heavy. Jacob looked at his sons, and they looked back at him. And everyone knew what had to happen. But knowing did not make it easier. It was Judah who spoke the words that broke the impasse. "Send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I will be a pledge of his safety. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. If we had not delayed, we could have gone and returned twice by now." Jacob closed his eyes. The thought of losing Benjamin, Rachel's other son, the last piece of his beloved wife that remained, was almost unbearable. But the alternative was watching his entire household starve to death. "If it must be so," Jacob said at last, his voice resigned, "then do this. Take some of the choice fruits of the land in your bags, and carry a present down to the man, a little balm and a little honey, gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Take double the silver with you. Carry back the silver that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take also your brother, and arise. Go again to the man. May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, and may he send back your other brother and Benjamin. As for me, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved." It was a father's surrender, spoken with the kind of hollow grief that comes when all choices lead to loss. The brothers took the gifts, the double silver, and Benjamin, and they went down to Egypt for the second time. When they arrived and stood before Joseph once more, his eyes immediately found Benjamin, his younger brother, now a grown man, but still recognizable, the same features, the same gentle eyes that reminded Joseph so much of their mother Rachel. Joseph's heart clenched. He had to turn away to compose himself. Then he spoke quickly to his steward, his voice tight with emotion barely held in check. "Bring the men into the house," he commanded. "Slaughter an animal and make ready, for the men are to dine with me at noon." The brothers were terrified when they were brought to Joseph's house. They were certain this was about the silver that had been returned in their sacks. They approached the steward anxiously. "Oh, my lord," they said, "we came down the first time to buy food. And when we came to the lodging place, we opened our sacks, and there was each man's silver in the mouth of his sack, our silver in full weight. So we have brought it again with us, and we have brought other silver down with us to buy food. We do not know who put our silver in our sacks." The steward smiled kindly. "Peace to you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has put treasure in your sacks for you. I received your silver." Then he brought Simeon out to them. The brothers could hardly believe it. Simeon was alive, well, unharmed. They were brought into Joseph's house, given water to wash their feet, and their donkeys were given fodder. They prepared their present for Joseph's arrival at noon, for they had heard they were to eat bread there. When Joseph came home, they brought him the present they had carried into the house, and they bowed down to him to the ground. Again, the dreams. Again, the fulfillment of what he had seen as a boy. Joseph asked them of their welfare, and said, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" They answered, "Your servant our father is well, he is still alive." And they bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. Joseph lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and he said, Is this your youngest brother, of whom you spoke to me?" Then, to Benjamin directly, his voice catching slightly, "God be gracious to you, my son." The emotion was too much. Joseph hurried out of the room, seeking a private place, and there he wept. He washed his face, regained control, and came back out, commanding, "Serve the food." They served him by himself, and the brothers by themselves, for Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews. It was an abomination to them. The brothers were seated before Joseph in order from the firstborn to the youngest, and they looked at one another in amazement. How could this Egyptian lord know their birth order? Portions were taken to them from Joseph's table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. And they drank and were merry with him. But Joseph had one final test planned, one more trial to see if his brothers had truly changed, or if they would abandon Benjamin just as they had once abandoned him. He commanded his steward, saying, "Fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. And put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest with his silver for the grain." The steward did as Joseph commanded. In the morning, as soon as it was light, the brothers were sent away with their donkeys. They had gone only a short distance from the city when Joseph said to his steward, "Up, follow after the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid evil for good? Is it not from this that my Lord drinks, and by this that he practices divination? You have done evil in doing this.'" The steward overtook them and spoke these words. The brothers were horrified. "Why does my Lord speak such words as these?" They protested, "Far be it from your servants to do such a thing. Behold, the silver that we found in the mouths of our sacks we brought back to you from the land of Canaan. How then could we steal silver or gold from your Lord's house? Whichever of your servants is found with it shall die, and we also will be my Lord's servants." The steward replied, "Let it be as you say. He who is found with it shall be my servant, and the rest of you shall be innocent." Each man quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it. The steward searched, beginning with the eldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. The brothers tore their clothes in anguish and despair. They loaded their donkeys and returned to the city, their hearts breaking. This could not be happening. Not Benjamin, not Rachel's son, not the one their father had begged them to protect. They came to Joseph's house, and he was still there. They fell before him to the ground, and Joseph said to them, "What deed is this that you have done? Do you not know that a man like me can indeed practice divination?" Judah spoke, his voice heavy with grief. "What shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how can we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also in whose hand the cup has been found." But Joseph shook his head. "Far be it from me that I should do so. Only the man in whose hand the cup was found shall be my servant. But as for you, go up in peace to your father." It was the same choice they had faced 22 years ago. Save themselves and abandon a brother. Tell their father that another son of Rachel was lost. Return home free, but living with the knowledge of what they had done. Then Judah stepped forward, and in that moment, everything changed. Judah came near to Joseph, his face desperate, his voice shaking but determined. What he said next would be the longest, most heartfelt speech recorded in all of Genesis. And Joseph stood there, listening, as the brother who had once suggested selling him into slavery now pleaded for the life of another. "Oh, my lord," Judah began, "please let your servant speak a word in my lord's ears, and let not your anger burn against your servant, for you are like Pharaoh himself." He continued, pouring out the whole story how the Lord of Egypt had asked if they had a father or another brother. how they had told him about their aged father and the youngest son, the child of his old age, whose brother was dead, so that he alone was left of his mother's children, and his father loved him. Then you said to your servants, Bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes on him. We said to my lord, The boy cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. But you said to your servants, Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall not see my face again. Judah described how they had returned to their father and told him everything, and how, when the food ran out and their father told them to go again and buy food, they had said they could not go unless Benjamin went with them. Then your servant my father said to us, You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One left me, and I said, Surely he has been torn to pieces, and I have never seen him since. If you take this one also from me, and harm happens to him, you will bring down my gray hairs in evil to Sheol. Joseph's hands were trembling. He gripped the arms of his chair, his jaw tight, fighting to maintain control. They were speaking of him, the son who left and never returned, the one their father believed had been torn to pieces. Judah's voice grew more urgent. Now, therefore, as soon as I come to your servant my father, and the boy is not with us, then, as his life is bound up in the boy's life, as soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die, and your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant our father with sorrow to Sheol. And then Judah said the words that broke Joseph completely. For your servant became a pledge of safety for the boy to my father, saying, If I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father all my life. Now, therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father. Judah was offering to take Benjamin's place, to become a slave in Egypt forever, so that his brother could go free, so that his father would not have to bear another loss. This was not the same man who had said, What profit is it if we kill our brother? This was a man transformed by guilt, by love, by the unbearable weight of watching his father grieve for 22 years. This was a man willing to sacrifice himself so that another would not suffer. Joseph could not contain himself any longer. Chapter 11. I am Joseph. Joseph cried out, Make everyone go out from me. And all his attendants went out, leaving him alone with his brothers. Then Joseph wept aloud, so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And through his tears, Joseph spoke the words that would change everything. I am Joseph. The brothers froze. The Hebrew words hung in the air, impossible, incomprehensible. The Egyptian lord had just spoken to them in their own language, and he had said, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. Terror seized them. The man they had sold into slavery was now the second most powerful person in Egypt. The brother they had thrown into a pit was standing before them with the authority to have them executed with a single word. They could not speak. They could barely breathe. Joseph saw their fear and spoke again, his voice gentle now, urgent with the need to make them understand. Please, come near to me. Hesitantly, trembling, they came closer. I am Joseph, your brother, he said, tears streaming down his face, whom you sold into Egypt. The words were a sword, cutting through 22 years of lies and guilt and buried pain. The truth, spoken aloud at last. Not an accusation, just a statement of fact. This is who I am. This is what you did. But then Joseph said something that none of them could have expected. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. They stared at him, unable to process what they were hearing. Joseph continued, his voice growing stronger, as if he himself was only now fully understanding the truth of what he was saying. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Then he said, with a kind of awe in his voice, "So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Not you, but God." Everything they had done, the hatred, the betrayal, the sale into slavery, God had taken it all and woven it into a plan of salvation. Their evil had been transformed into good. Their cruelty had become the means by which millions would be saved from starvation. It was too much to comprehend, too large, too merciful. "Hurry," Joseph said, urgency creeping back into his voice. "Go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have do not come to poverty.'" He looked at Benjamin, and fresh tears came. "And now your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth that speaks to you. You must tell my father of all my honor in Egypt, and of all that you have seen. Hurry and bring my father down here." Then Joseph could restrain himself no longer. He fell upon Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. And Joseph kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. And after that his brothers talked with him. The barrier was broken. The years of separation, the wall of guilt and fear, all of it dissolved in tears and embrace. They were brothers again. Broken, yes. Scarred, certainly. But together, word spread quickly through the palace. "Joseph's brothers have come." The news reached Pharaoh, and it pleased him. He said to Joseph, "Say to your brothers, 'Do this. Load your beasts and go back to the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land.' You are commanded to say, 'Do this. Take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father, and come. Have no concern for your goods. For the best of all, the land of Egypt is yours." Joseph gave his brothers wagons and provisions for the journey, and to each of them he gave changes of clothing. But to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of clothing. To his father he sent 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and provision for the journey. As they were about to depart, Joseph looked at his brothers, at the fear still lingering in their eyes, at the guilt they would carry for the rest of their lives, and he said one more thing: "Do not quarrel on the way." It was both a command and a comfort. Do not let guilt tear you apart. Do not turn on one another in blame and recrimination. What is done is done. What matters now is moving forward. The brothers left Egypt, their hearts still reeling, their minds struggling to accept the impossible truth. Joseph was alive. Joseph had forgiven them. Joseph was sending for their father. They traveled north, back to Canaan, and when they arrived at their father's house, they rushed to him with the news. "Joseph is still alive," they cried, "and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt." Jacob's heart became numb. He did not believe them. It was too much, too impossible. His son had been dead for 22 years. This had to be some kind of cruel joke, some delusion born of desperation. But then they told him all the words that Joseph had said to them. And when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. "It is enough," Jacob said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." And so Israel set out with all that he had. 70 people in all, Jacob and his sons, their wives and children, their flocks and herds, journeying down to Egypt, to the land where Joseph waited. When they reached Goshen, Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father. He presented himself to him, fell on his neck, and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." It was the reunion of father and son, separated for more than 2 decades by betrayal and lies, now brought back together by the mysterious, redemptive work of God. And as Jacob held his son, the boy he thought he had lost forever, he understood at last that sometimes the stories that break our hearts the most are the very ones God uses to write his greatest miracles. Chapter 12. The Reunion and God's Greater Plan. The land of Goshen was rich and green, fed by the waters of the Nile, with pastures that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was the best land in all of Egypt, and Pharaoh had given it freely to Joseph's family, honoring the man who had saved his kingdom from ruin. Jacob and his household settled there, 70 souls in all. They built their tents, tended their flocks, and for the first time in years, they did not worry about famine or hunger. Joseph provided for them abundantly, ensuring they had everything they needed. The old patriarch walked through the fields of Goshen with wonder in his eyes. He had left Canaan believing he would die in Egypt, but he did not care. He had seen Joseph's face. He had held his son in his arms. And that was enough. Joseph came to visit whenever his duties allowed, bringing his sons Manasseh and Ephraim to meet their grandfather. Jacob would hold the boys on his knees and tell them stories of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who had been faithful through every trial, every exile, every moment of despair. "Remember," Jacob would say, his weathered hand resting on their heads, "we are not Egyptians, though we dwell in Egypt. We belong to the God who made a covenant with our fathers. One day, he will bring our people back to the land he promised. Never forget who you are. Never forget whose you are." The years passed. Jacob grew older, his strength fading like the last light of evening. He knew his time was drawing near, and he called Joseph to his side. "If now I have found favor in your sight," Jacob said, his voice weak but earnest, "put your hand under my thigh and promise to deal kindly and truly with me. Do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. Carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burying place." Joseph's eyes filled with tears. "I will do as you have said," he promised. "Swear to me," Jacob insisted. And Joseph swore to him. Not long after, Jacob fell ill. When Joseph heard that his father was failing, he took his 2 sons and went to him. Jacob summoned his strength and sat up in bed, and he blessed Joseph and his sons with words that carried the weight of generations. He placed his hands on Manasseh and Ephraim, crossing his arms so that his right hand rested on the younger boy's head. Joseph tried to correct him, but Jacob said, "I know, my son, I know. The older shall also become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations." It was a blessing and a prophecy, and Joseph received it with humility, knowing that God's ways are not always what human wisdom would choose. Then Jacob called all his sons to him, all 12, and he spoke words over each one. Words of blessing for some, words of rebuke for others, words that would define the tribes of Israel for generations to come. When he came to Judah, Jacob's voice grew stronger. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. It was a royal blessing, a promise that kingship would come through Judah's line. And one day, from that line, the greatest king of all would be born. When Jacob finished blessing his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. Then he commanded the physicians in his service to embalm his father. The embalming took 40 days, and the Egyptians wept for him 70 days, honoring the father of the man who had saved their nation. When the days of weeping were past, Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's household. If now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, my father made me swear, saying, I am about to die. In my tomb that I hewed out for myself in the land of Canaan, there shall you bury me. Now, therefore, let me please go up and bury my father. Then I will return. Pharaoh answered, go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the household of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's household. It was a great company, a funeral procession worthy of a prince. They came to the threshing floor of Atad, beyond the Jordan, and there they lamented with a very great and grievous lamentation. Joseph made a mourning for his father 7 days. When the inhabitants of the land saw the mourning, they said, this is a grievous mourning by the Egyptians. Therefore the place was named Abel Mizraim, which means mourning of Egypt. Jacob's sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, the field that Abraham had bought as a burying place. There Jacob was laid to rest beside Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and his beloved wife Leah. When Joseph and his brothers returned to Egypt, a new fear gripped the brothers' hearts. Their father was dead. What if Joseph had only been kind to them for Jacob's sake? What if now, with their father gone, Joseph would finally take his revenge? They sent a message to Joseph saying, your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your. Received their message, he wept. That they still feared him after all these years broke his heart. The brothers came and fell down before him, saying, behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. It was the final word, the definitive answer to the question that had hung over them for so long. Forgiveness was not conditional. It was not dependent on their father's presence. It was complete, rooted in Joseph's understanding that God's purposes were greater than human sin. Joseph lived in Egypt, he and his father's house. And Joseph lived 110 years. He saw Ephraim's children of the 3rd generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. As his own death approached, Joseph gathered his brothers and said to them, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land, to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. It was a statement of faith. Joseph had lived his entire adult life in Egypt. He had risen to power there, married there, raised his children there. Egypt had been good to him. But Egypt was not home. Home was the land God had promised to his fathers. And even though he would not live to see it, Joseph believed that one day God would fulfill his promise. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. But his bones waited. For 400 years, through slavery and oppression, through the rise of a new Pharaoh who did not know Joseph, through the cries of Israel in bondage, Joseph's bones waited in that coffin. And when the time came when Moses led the people out of Egypt in the great Exodus, they remembered. They took the bones of Joseph with them, carrying them through the wilderness, across the Jordan, into the promised land. And there, in the land of Canaan, in the portion that belonged to Joseph's descendants, they buried him at last. Home, where he had always belonged. The story of Joseph is not just about a man who went from slavery to power. It is about the mysterious, redemptive work of God, who takes the broken pieces of human sin and suffering and weaves them into a tapestry of grace. Joseph's brothers meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And in that divine alchemy, where human wickedness is transformed into divine purpose, we see the heart of the story. That no pit is too deep for God to reach into. No prison is beyond his power to open. No betrayal is so complete that he cannot redeem it. No suffering is so meaningless that he cannot use it for his glory. Joseph suffered unjustly. He was abandoned, enslaved, falsely accused, and forgotten. But through it all, God was preparing him not just to save Egypt, but to save his own family, to preserve the line through which the Messiah would one day come. The dreams were true. The promises were kept. And the God who was with Joseph in the pit, in Potiphar's house, in prison, and in the palace, is the same God who is with us today. When we cannot see the purpose, when suffering makes no sense, when we feel abandoned and alone, he is still there, still working, still weaving our story into his greater plan. That is the message of Joseph's life. And it is a message that echoes through every generation, whispering hope to every broken heart. Trust him, even in the darkness, even in the waiting, even when all seems lost, because he who began a good work will be faithful to complete it. And what man intends for evil, God will always, always transform into good.
And so, beloved listener, as this ancient story draws to a close, let these truths settle gently upon your heart as you drift toward sleep. You have walked with Joseph tonight, from the brightness of his youth to the darkness of the pit, from slavery to the palace, from abandonment to reunion. And through it all, one truth remained constant: God was with him. Perhaps you have known betrayal. Perhaps you have sat in your own pit, wondering why. Perhaps you have waited in prison, not behind iron bars, but in circumstances you did not choose. If that is you tonight, then hear this. God has not forgotten you. Just as he was with Joseph in the pit, he is with you in yours. The story is not over. The final chapter has not been written. What man intends for evil, God intends for good. Always. So rest now. Let go of the need to understand. Release the burden of trying to fix what only God can heal. Trust that he is good, that he is sovereign, that he wastes nothing, not your tears, not your pain, not a single moment of your waiting. Sleep now, dear one. You are not forgotten. You are not abandoned. You are held in the hands of a God who turns pits into palaces and mourning into dancing. And when morning comes, may you carry with you this truth, that your life is not random, your suffering is not meaningless, and your story is still being written by the one who makes all things, even the hardest, Most broken things work together for good. Rest in his love. Rest in his faithfulness. Rest in the promise that he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. The God of Joseph is your God too, and his plans for you are greater than you could ever dream. Sleep well, beloved child of God. Your Father is watching, and his peace, which surpasses all understanding, guards your heart and mind as you rest in him. Good night.
Right now, you're being
Well, well. Pretty cool story. It was great even twice, listening to it twice. It was so good. I hope it helps somebody. I hope it rejuvenates the soul, whatever it's supposed to do. Thank everybody for coming. Hope you all enjoyed it. Be kind to each other. Forgive each other. And I don't know what to say after something like that, right? Let it seep in, let it soak in. All right, guys, I'm going to close out now. God bless you guys. And I hope you guys all, I'll see you guys again soon. Peace, guys.